Nicolás Maduro did not disappear in chaos. He did not fall with tanks in the streets. He did not face a crowd breaking down palace gates. Instead, he vanished quietly. One day, he was the most protected man in Venezuela. The next, he was gone. No long firefight, no dramatic final speech, no loyal generals dying to defend him. And that silence shocked everyone because regimes like Maduro's do not collapse from outside pressure alone. They collapse when something breaks inside. For years, the opposition tried everything. Elections failed, protests were crushed, sanctions tightened, nothing worked, until suddenly everything did. The fall was too clean, too fast, too controlled, and that raises a dangerous question. What if the real operation did not begin in Washington? What if it did not begin with foreign forces at all? What if it began months earlier in quiet rooms, through secret channels, between politicians who wanted power and generals who wanted survival? Today, there is no proof, no signed agreements, no public confessions, but there are patterns, and history teaches us to follow patterns. In this episode, we're not accusing, we're questioning. Was Maduro removed by force or by betrayal? And could the leader of the opposition have played a role from the shadows, working with military figures who decided was time to switch sides? Because when power changes hands without a fight, someone made a deal. This is Denzel speaking, and welcome to the world of Intrigue. For years, people believed Nicolás Maduro was the center of power in Venezuela, the face, the voice, the symbol, but real power did not sit in presidential palace. It sat in military headquarters. Maduro did not rule alone. He ruled through generals, through commanders, through men who controlled weapons, bases, and troops. Without them, he was just a politician. And this is the first rule of authoritarian power. The leader survives only as long as the military obeys. Maduro understood this better than anyone. He promoted loyal officers. He routed generals constantly. He rewarded opinions with money, influence, and protection. The military was not just an institution, it was a shield. That shield protected Maduro from protest, from elections, from international pressure. And when people marched, soldiers stood in their way. When the opposition spoke, the generals stayed silent. And as long as the silence held, Maduro remained untouchable. This is why every failed attempt to remove him collapsed, not because the opposition was weak, but because the military stayed united. And history shows this clearly. In regimes like this, leaders do not fall when the people rise, they fall when the generals hesitate. And for years, there was no hesitation. The opposition knew this truth. Foreign governments know it too. That is why speeches changed nothing. Sanctions hurt the economy, but not the structure. Protest choked the streets, but not the barracks. The real battle was never in public squares, it was inside closed rooms. This is why the moment Maduro fell, experts were confused, because the military did not fight. There was no massive resistance, no loyal divisions rushing to defend the president, no generals calling for blood. That absence is not normal. When the military is truly loyal, it reacts fast, violently, decisively. But this time, it did not. Orders were slow, responses were delayed. Some units stayed quiet, and quiet in moments like this is powerful. It suggests hesitation, calculation, choice. This is where curiosity begins. Because if the military was the backbone of Maduro's rule and the backbone suddenly relaxed, then the real story is not about how Maduro was captured, it's about when the military stopped protecting him. And once you understand that, another question naturally follows: what made the generals reconsider? That's where the story truly starts. Loyalty is easy when power feels permanent, but loyalty becomes fragile when the future looks dangerous. But the final years of Maduro's rule, the pressure on Venezuela generals was growing quietly, not in public, not in speeches, but in bank accounts, in travel bans, in whispered warnings. International sanctions were no longer abstract, they were personal. Assets were frozen, families were affected, names appeared on lists. For the first time, being loyal to Maduro carried a cost. Generals began to understand something uncomfy is happening. If the regime collapsed suddenly, they would fall with it. No protection, no escape, no second chance. History had already shown them the ending. Other countries, other dictators, other loyal commanders who ended up isolated, prosecuted, or forgotten. And fear is a powerful teacher. At the same time, the economy continued to collapse, resources shrank, promises became harder to keep, money that once bought loyalty was disappearing. When rewards vanished, loyalty weakens. Inside military circles, questions started to surface. Quiet questions, dangerous ones. How long can this last? What happens after Maduro? Who protects us when he's gone? These questions do not need meetings. They separated naturally. The regime reaches Every regime reaches this phase, the moment when survival matters more than the ideology. And in that moment, generals stop thinking like soldiers. They start thinking like survivors. This is when the alternatives become interesting. No, not in military coups, not in chaos, but negotiation exists. History is clear on this point. When pressure builds from the outside, regimes do not collapse immediately. They rot slowly from within. And rot creates opportunity for anyone who can offer protection, guarantees a future. At this stage, nothing needs to be signed, nothing needs to be announced. All it takes is the idea that loyalty is optional. And once that idea exists, power is already slipping. So when Maduro finally fell, the question was no longer if the military would protect him. The real question was why they didn't. And that leads us to the next layer of the story. Because when generals start looking for exits, someone is always ready to offer a door, and someone is rarely wearing a uniform. The day Nicolás Maduro fell did not look like anyone expected. He did not disappear in revolution. He did not face a huge protest in the streets. He did not fight a long battle in his palace. Instead, he vanished quietly. Early in the morning, explosions were heard across Caracas. Planes flew over the city. Elite troops moved quickly. It was an attack no one had seen coming. The world watched in shock. Maduro had spent years making sure he was safe. He had built walls of loyal soldiers. He had protected himself with intelligence agents. He had surrounded himself with generals who would never betray him. And yet, the operation succeeded. Experts could not believe it. There was no long battles. There were no loyal soldiers rushing to defend him. There were no generals calling for action. It was almost as if the defenses had been turned off. The official story said it was a U.S. military operation, planes, helicopters, special forces, a carefully planned attack, a quiet strike to take Maduro alive. But even with all this planning, some things did not make sense. The presidential palace did not resist strongly. Some military bases did not fight at all. Certain generals seemed to pause or stay silent or stay quiet. In other words, the system that had protected Maduro for years suddenly failed. And when the backbone of a leader collapses so fast, questions appear. The casualties also confused people. Some Venezuela soldiers and Cuban personnel died during the operation. It was violent, but it wasn't a total battle. The attack was deadly but controlled. It was a mix of chaos and silence. Then came the most shocking part. Maduro was flown out of Venezuela, first to a military ship, then to New York, where he appeared in a court. A sitting president of a country, arrested and brought to a foreign court. Few could believe it. Even after all the explosions, planes, and elite troops, the real mystery remained. Why did the loyal military not fight back? Why did the defense fail so fast? Why were some generals quiet while others did not act? Maduro had relied on these generals for decades. They were his shield. They were the reason he survived protests, sanctions, and international pressure. But on that day, the shield seemed to vanish. No loud alarms, no desperate commands, no fight to the end. Only a fast, clean operation that removed the leader of Venezuela from power. And that is what makes the day so strange. The attack was too perfect, too fast, too precise. It worked like a clockwork. Even though Maduro's defense should have stopped it, the world saw the result. Maduro captured, taken out of his country, the capital strangely, calm after the first strikes, but the people who understood power asked another question. If Maduro's strength came from the military, and if the military suddenly stopped protecting him, then maybe the operation's success was not only about outside forces. Maybe someone inside had decided not to act. Maybe someone had chosen to step aside at the right moment. When the system fails quietly, when defenses do not work, the question starts manipulating. Why did some units not fight? Why were some generals untouched afterward? Why did everything happen so fast? This is where the story becomes more than an operation. It becomes a mystery, a puzzle waiting for answers. Because the day Maduro fell did not just change Venezuela, it reveals cracks. Cracks inside the system he built. Cracks inside the people who were supposed to protect him. And those cracks are what we will explore next. At the end, we have to know that Maduro is gone, but the full story is still hidden. The streets are calm, the leaders are repositioning, and the world watches closely. But the questions remain. Did this fall happen only because of outside forces, or was it planned quietly from the inside by those who had the power to protect him but choose not to? Could someone have waited patiently in the shadows, knowing exactly when to act or when to stay silent? History may reveal the truth one day, but for now we're left with one question, and you can answer this question in the comments. Who really decided the fate of Nicolás Maduro, and were we watching the fall of a regime or the betrayal of a leader?